In the winter of 1847, in a small town just outside Salem, Massachusetts, a young woman named Latoya was admitted to the Blessed Mercy Infirmary, a religious hospital run by Protestant ministers. What occurred during her 37 days of treatment was so disturbing that the attending physicians destroyed most of their records. Only one doctor's personal journal survived, hidden for over a century in his family's attic. The case file, stamped confidential, never to be discussed, contained details that challenged everything the medical community believed about the human mind and the soul. Local church leaders pressured the hospital to seal the remaining records permanently. Within 6 months, 3 of the 7 doctors who treated Latoya left Massachusetts, never to practice medicine again. What you're about to hear has never been told in full, until now. If you're brave enough to uncover the darkest secrets that religious institutions tried to bury, hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comments what state you're listening from. This channel isn't for everyone, only for those who dare to seek the truth that others fear to speak. Our story begins with what appeared to be a simple admission to a hospital that prided itself on combining Christian compassion with the latest medical knowledge of the time. The town of Millbrook, Massachusetts, sat like a watchful sentinel 15 miles northwest of Salem, its white steepled churches rising above modest wooden homes that sheltered barely 800 souls. In 1847, the community remained deeply divided between the old Congregationalist families who had founded the settlement in 1692 and the growing number of Irish Catholic immigrants seeking work in the textile mills along the Mary River. At the heart of this tension stood the Blessed Mercy Infirmary, a 3-story brick building erected in 1834 by Reverend Ezekiel Whitmore, a stern Congregationalist minister who believed that healing the body first required the purification of the soul. With its 20 beds, it was the largest medical facility between Boston and the New Hampshire border, drawing patients from across Essex County. The staff, 7 Protestant physicians, all Harvard-trained, prided themselves on combining science with Christian principles. The hospital's chief physician, Dr. Jonathan Aldrich, had studied under the renowned alienist Dr. Samuel Woodward at Worcester State Hospital. At just 34, Aldrich possessed a precise, methodical mind and an unwavering faith in both medical progress and divine providence. His colleagues respected his innovative approach to treating what they called disorders of the mind, conditions that other doctors dismissed as mere moral weakness or even demonic possession. The hospital's daily routine began at 5 in the morning with communal prayer, followed by medical rounds, and concluded each evening with scripture reading. Patients, regardless of their faith, were expected to participate in these observances. The nuns from a nearby Sacred Heart convent, despite being Catholic, were permitted to assist with nursing care due to their medical training, a controversial arrangement that stirred fierce debate among Millbrook's Protestant congregations. Dr. Aldrich kept meticulous records of every patient, filling leather-bound journals with detailed notes on symptoms, treatments, and outcomes. His personal study on the hospital's 3rd floor housed hundreds of these volumes, dating back to the infirmary's founding. He believed that truly understanding the human condition meant documenting not only physical ailments, but also the spiritual and emotional struggles that accompanied them. That winter had been brutally cold. Weeks of sub-freezing temperatures that even the hospital's coal furnaces could barely fight. The air inside smelled of carbolic acid and with smoke, creating an atmosphere patients often described as heavy and oppressive. It was into this environment that Latoya arrived, carrying with her a mystery that would challenge everything the staff believed about the nature of human suffering. On the morning of January 15th, 1847, a horse-drawn carriage fought its way through the snow-covered streets of Millbrook, carrying a young woman who would soon become the most disturbing case in the hospital's history. Latoya appeared to be in her early 20s, dark-haired, olive-skinned. Her mixed ancestry, an unspoken mark in the prejudiced Massachusetts of time. She'd been discovered 3 days earlier by a farmer named Silas Hartwell, lying unconscious in his barn, dressed only in a thin cotton gown despite the freezing cold. When she awoke, she spoke in faint whispers and claimed to remember nothing of how she had gotten there. Her only possessions were a small leather pouch containing 7 silver coins and a peculiar brass locket with no identifying marks. Dr. Aldrich's initial examination revealed a patient in surprisingly strong physical condition. Her vitals were steady, her reflexes sharp, and there were no signs of frostbite or malnutrition. Yet her behavior immediately unsettled him. She spoke only when directly addressed, answered every question with unnerving precision, and seemed almost supernaturally aware of her surroundings. When asked for her full name, she simply replied, "Latoya," nothing more. The strangest part of her admission came when the doctors asked about her religious background. Her demeanor shifted instantly. Her hands began to tremble, her breathing turned shallow, and she started whispering in what Dr. Aldrich assumed was Latin. But Dr. Marcus Brennan, the hospital's youngest physician and a scholar of classical languages, quickly realized that the words did not follow Latin structure. They seemed to blend multiple tongues, Brennan wrote in his notes, perhaps fragments of African or Caribbean dialects. Yet she speaks them with such fluency, it must be her native language. But when asked, she insists she knows only English. That first night, the nursing staff reported unusual occurrences that first night. Sister Mary Catherine, a nun from the Sacred Heart Convent, noted that Latoya seemed to anticipate events before they happened. She would sit up in bed moments before the night watchman passed by, ask for water precisely when the well needed refilling, and wake from sleep at the exact moment the church bells began to ring, as though some unseen clock guided her every action. But what truly unsettled the staff were the testimonies from other patients. Mrs. Alina Hitchcock, a 50-year-old woman recovering from pneumonia, claimed that Latoya had spoken to her during the night, in her sleep, describing in perfect detail the death of Mrs. Hitchcock's husband 5 years earlier. Details no one at the hospital could have possibly known. When confronted, Latoya denied ever speaking to Mrs. Hitchcock and professed no knowledge of any deceased husband. Dr. Aldrich initially dismissed these accounts as the delusions of fevered minds, until he saw something with his own eyes that forced him to question everything he believed. On the evening of January 18th, while making his final rounds, Dr. Aldrich found Latoya sitting upright in her bed, eyes closed, murmuring in that same unknown language she had spoken during intake. Her voice echoed through the ward with eerie clarity. As the sound carried, every patient in the surrounding beds began to stir and whisper in their sleep. The most disturbing account came from Thomas Brewster, a young man recovering from a severe leg injury. He later told Dr. Aldrich that, as Latoya spoke, his mind filled with visions. Vivid scenes of a tropical island he had never seen, of people dancing and chanting around firelight, performing ceremonies that felt both ancient and forbidden. When Latoya abruptly stopped speaking and opened her eyes, Brewster found tears running down his face. Tears he could not explain. Dr. Aldrich recorded the event in his journal. The patient exhibits behaviors that defy our understanding of mental disorder. She shows no sign of hysteria, nor of melancholia, yet her mere presence seems to affect others in ways that medical science cannot explain. I find myself torn between my training in reason and the evidence of phenomena that lie beyond human comprehension. From that night forward, the hospital's routine began to shift around her presence. Nurses reported that their daily work seemed smoother, almost effortless, whenever Latoya was calm, but became plagued with mistakes and misfortunes whenever she appeared distressed. Even the hospital's stubborn coal furnaces, which had struggled all winter, began to burn evenly. The endless problem with rats in the basement gone completely during her first week. These changes did not escape the notice of Reverend Whitmore, who visited the infirmary twice each week to offer spiritual guidance. During his visit on January 20th, he spent nearly an hour alone with Latoya in the hospital's small chapel. Witnesses later recalled the Reverend emerging pale and trembling, clutching his prayer book with shaking hands. When Dr. Aldrich asked what happened, the Reverend replied only, "That young woman carries knowledge no Christian soul should possess. I fear what we face here extends beyond medicine. into realms where only God's judgment can reach. His words would prove prophetic. Within days, the Blessed Mercy Infirmary would experience events that would test both the faith and sanity of everyone involved in Latoya's care. The days following Reverend Whitmore's encounter brought subtle, yet undeniable, changes throughout the hospital. Dr. Aldrich, a man grounded in logic, began to notice patterns he could not explain. Patients who had been bedridden for weeks began showing remarkable improvement when Latoya was moved near them. Yet those who feared or disliked her presence seemed to grow weaker, their symptoms worsening in direct proportion to their discomfort. Dr. Brennan, whose fascination with her strange language had driven him to study old manuscripts, made a discovery that would haunt him for the rest of his career. While researching maritime archives of the Salem Historical Society, he stumbled upon references to a slave ship called the Esperanza, which had wrecked off the Massachusetts coast in 1823. Among the rescued survivors was a young girl, described as speaking in tongues unknown to Christian ears and possessing knowledge of healing arts that defied natural philosophy. The ship's faded manifest listed her name, Latoya, approximately 4 years old. According to the records, she was placed in the care of a Presbyterian family in nearby Peabody, but disappeared 3 years later, leaving behind a single note written in the same incomprehensible script that Dr. Brennan had heard her speak. In a letter to a Harvard colleague, Brennan wrote, "If this is truly the same individual, she would now be 28 years old, yet our patient appears no older than 22. Moreover, she was raised by a devout Christian household. How then did she acquire knowledge of what seems to be African spiritual practice?" Dr. Aldrich dismissed the idea as coincidence until he mentioned the shipwreck records to Latoya during one of their daily sessions. Her reaction was immediate and overwhelming. She began to speak rapidly in the unknown tongue, tears streaming down her face as she clutched the brass locket, the same one found among her few belongings. For the first time since her arrival, Latoya began to speak of her past. Her words came in fragments, flashes of memory, a ship tossed by violent waves, the clatter of chains, the stench of death, and voices crying out in languages she understood, yet could not name. She spoke of being taken to a house where people tried to wash away what I was, and of fleeing into the forest to live among those who still remembered the old ways. Then her voice softened. "I do not age as others do," she whispered to Dr. Aldrich. "Time moves differently for those who carry the weight of generations. I remember being young, but I also remember being old. I remember dying, and I remember being born. The line between past and present," Latoya said, "had dissolved long ago." Dr. Aldrich documented these conversations with growing unease. As a man of science, he searched for rational explanations for everything he witnessed. Perhaps, he reasoned, Latoya suffered from some rare form of dissociative disorder, creating elaborate fantasies to cope with childhood trauma. Yet her precise knowledge of historical events, her ability to predict minor occurrences within the hospital, and her mysterious influence on other patients hinted at something far more complex. The hospital staff soon divided into two camps: those who viewed Latoya as a fascinating medical case worthy of study, and those who whispered that she had brought an unholy presence into their Christian institution. Sister Mary Catherine, though trained in Catholic doctrine that recognized the mysteries of the Spirit, found herself strangely torn between faith and reason. "I have witnessed what the Church calls miracles," she confided to Dr. Aldrich. "I have seen prayer heal the sick and comfort the dying. But what I feel in this young woman's presence, it's different, ancient, primal, connected to forces that existed long before Christ walked the earth. It doesn't feel evil, but it doesn't feel wholly good either. It simply feels old." The tension within the infirmary reached a breaking point when Mrs. Hitchcock, the pneumonia patient who had claimed Latoya spoke of her dead husband, made a shocking request. She asked to be moved to the bed directly beside Latoya's. "She doesn't just speak to me," Mrs. Hitchcock explained softly to Dr. Aldrich. "She helps me remember the way Samuel laughed when he was truly happy, the songs he used to hum while working in the garden, the exact words he said to me on our wedding day. It's as though she can reach into the past and bring back pieces of it. Dr. Aldrich reluctantly agreed to the change, unaware that his decision would set off a chain of events no one could have foreseen. Soon, other patients began requesting the same, drawn by rumors of vivid dreams, sudden recoveries, and an indescribable sense of peace that surrounded a mysterious young woman. But not everyone found comfort in her presence. Jacob Morrison, a merchant recovering from dysentery, became increasingly agitated whenever Latoya was near. He spoke of terrifying dreams, visions of people in chains, of violence and suffering, of voices crying out in languages he didn't know but somehow understood. His health deteriorated so rapidly that Dr. Aldrich was forced to move him to another wing. "She brings the sins of the past with her," Morrison told the doctor during a rare, lucid moment. "I see things I've never lived, yet they feel like memories. I see myself as someone else, someone who did terrible things. And I can't escape the guilt of acts I never committed." These polarized reactions, peace for some, torment for others, created an atmosphere of quiet dread that permeated the entire hospital. Staff began to avoid Latoya's corridor after hours, whispering prayers under their breath when passing her room. Yet others, inexplicably drawn to her, lingered there whenever they could. Dr. Aldrich noticed a pattern. Younger staff members seemed almost unaffected, while the older ones, especially those with strong religious convictions, grew restless and fearful. The situation reached new complexity when Reverend Whitmore returned for his weekly visit. This time, he was not alone. He brought with him two other ministers, Reverend Isaiah Blackwood of the First Baptist Church and Reverend Cornelius Marsh from the Methodist congregation. The three men requested a private meeting with Dr. Aldrich to discuss what they called a matter of grave spiritual concern. "We have reason to believe," Reverend Whitmore began, his voice low and trembling, "that your patient may be engaging in forms of worship that are not only unchristian, but spiritually harmful to those around her. Families of patients have reported troubling dreams and visions that bear no resemblance to any Christian revelation." Dr. Aldrich found himself caught between two worlds, his oath to medicine and the authority of the church that funded his institution. And the minister's concerns were not entirely unfounded. He, too, had seen transformations in patients that defied every scientific explanation he knew. Yet Latoya herself displayed no malice, no manipulation, only confusion, as though she were as disturbed by her influence as everyone else. The meeting ended in a fragile compromise that would mark a turning point in the case. The ministers would be permitted to observe Latoya's interactions with patients, while Dr. Aldrich would continue his medical evaluations without interference. Neither side could have foreseen how this agreement would lead to discoveries that would shatter both science and faith. The joint observation began on February 1st, 1847. Dr. Aldrich and the three clergymen established a strict protocol for monitoring Latoya's encounters with patients and staff. What they witnessed over the following weeks would forever change their understanding of human nature. Reverend Blackwood, the Baptist minister whose faith emphasized personal spiritual experience, was the first to notice what he called sacred synchronicities in Latoya's behavior. She would begin speaking in that strange, ancient language precisely when nearby patients fell into deep emotional distress, as though she could sense their pain. Even more remarkable, her words seemed to soothe those who couldn't understand a single syllable. "I must confess," Reverend Blackwood wrote in his journal, "I have never witnessed such a display of spiritual empathy. The young woman appears capable of absorbing and transforming the suffering of others. If this is a gift from the Almighty, then it is one without precedent in Scripture." Meanwhile, Dr. Aldrich had begun a series of controlled studies, with Latoya's consent, to test the limits of her apparent abilities. He arranged sessions in which she met patients while he observed unseen from behind partition, recording her every movement, every word, every reaction. The results consistently defied reason. During one such session, she was introduced to a man named Mr. Jeremiah Couch, about what's yet to come. Her frail hands trembled as she spoke, but her eyes burned with strange clarity. "Latoya doesn't just bring back what's been forgotten," she said. "She shows what will be. I've seen faces I don't know, walking streets that haven't been built yet. I've seen fires in the hills and a river that runs black. And she says it's not a curse, doctor, it's remembrance. The world remembers itself through us." Dr. Aldrich listened in silence, torn between skepticism and dread. The woman's words carried a conviction that left no room for madness. "What else did she show you?" he asked quietly. Mrs. Hitchcock hesitated, glancing toward Latoya's room. "She showed me you," she whispered, standing in a place of ruins, holding a book, her book, and you were weeping. Before he could press her for more, Mrs. Hitchcock's strength failed. She closed her eyes, a faint smile crossing her lips, and within minutes, she passed peacefully in her sleep. That same night, Dr. Aldrich sat alone in his office, surrounded by his notes and sketches. The storm outside battered the hospital windows as he tried to make sense of what he had witnessed. Latoya's influence was spreading, not through contagion or hysteria, but through something deeper, something that touched the very roots of memory and time. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. It was Sister Mary Catherine, her face pale and drawn. "Doctor," she said softly, "you need to come. The ministers are performing a prayer vigil in her room. They believe they can drive out whatever spirit has taken hold of her." Aldrich rushed the ward, his heart pounding. When he arrived, the scene that met him was chaos. Reverend Whitmore stood at the foot of Latoya's bed, Bible in hand, reciting scripture in a trembling voice. Reverend Blackwood and Marsh joined him, chanting prayers in desperate rhythm. Latoya lay motionless, her eyes open but unblinking, her lips moving silently. The air was thick, charged with an almost electric energy that made the hair on everyone's arms stand on end. "Stop this," Aldrich shouted. "You're harming her." But before anyone could react, Latoya suddenly sat upright. A low hum filled the room, vibrating through the walls and floor. The candles flickered violently, then went out all at once, plunging the ward into darkness. Several nurses screamed. When the lights returned, Latoya was standing, her eyes reflecting a depth that seemed not entirely human. "Do not fear," she said in that strange, ancient tongue. The ministers froze. "You call me spirit, curse, demon, yet I am none of these. I am what you were before you forgot yourselves." Reverend Marsh fell to his knees, clutching his chest, muttering prayers through tears. Reverend Whitmore dropped his Bible. Only Aldrich remained standing, his breath shallow, unable to look away. "What are you?" he whispered. Latoya turned to him slowly. "A witness," she said, "and soon you'll be one too." Then she collapsed unconscious. The ministers fled the room, shaken to their core. Aldrich and Sister Mary Catherine worked through the night to revive her, but her pulse was faint and irregular. When she finally opened her eyes, she spoke no more, neither in the strange language nor in English. She seemed to have retreated somewhere far beyond reach. The following weeks were marked by silence. Latoya remained alive, but unresponsive. Patients reported no more dreams or visions. The hospital grew quiet again, though an unease lingered in every corridor. Dr. Aldrich continued his notes, documenting everything, but he could not bring himself to share them publicly. In his final journal entry, dated April 3, 1847, he wrote, "I have come to believe that what we call memory is not confined to mind, nor even to the living. It is a current, ancient, unbroken, flowing through all who have ever been. Latoya was its vessel, and for a brief time, she allowed us to see the river. Now that she is silent, I fear that current continues beneath us, waiting for another to awaken. No record remains what became of Latoya afterward. Some say she was transferred to another institution. Others claim she simply vanished one night during a thunderstorm. But among the few surviving pages of Aldrich's notes, one final line appears, written in an unsteady hand, words that were not his own. The past is not behind us. It sleeps beneath our feet. Foundations, both spiritual and physical. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The flickering lamplight cast long, uneasy shadows across the office walls as the weight of what they'd uncovered settled between them. "This cannot leave this room," Reverend Whitmore finally said, his voice trembling with a mixture of shame and authority. "Do you understand, Doctor? If word of this ever spreads, it will destroy not only this hospital but the church itself." Dr. Aldrich closed the leather-bound journal, his hands shaking. "Reverend, people suffered here. They were tortured, murdered, buried beneath this very building, and all of it in the name of progress and faith. How can we claim to heal when we're standing on a grave?" Whitmore's expression hardened. "Our duty is to protect the living. The sins of the past must be buried with the dead." But Aldrich could see the fear behind the minister's composure. He realized then that Whitmore wasn't just afraid of scandal. He was afraid of something deeper, something he already knew. "You were aware of this, weren't you?" Aldrich said quietly. "You knew about the bones, the experiments, maybe even about her." The Reverend's silence was answer enough. That night, Aldrich returned to his quarters unable to sleep. The journals lay open across his desk, the words seeming to shift in the candlelight. He read the final page again, Blackwood's last confession written in a shaky, ink-blotted hand. I hear her voice in the walls. She walks the corridors at night, humming the songs of her people. I burned her records, buried her tools, sealed her chamber with lime and stone. But she remains, watching, waiting. I cannot tell where she ends and I begin. The next morning, Aldrich descended alone into the hospital's basement, the oldest part of the building. Dust and decay filled the air. At the far end of the corridor, he found a sealed doorway half hidden behind stacks of medical crates. The wall bore faint carvings, symbols that resembled the one Sister Mary Catherine had once described seeing in Latoya's drawings. With a crowbar, he broke through the bricks. Behind the wall was a narrow stone chamber, the air thick and cold as if untouched by time. At its center stood an old iron bed frame, rusted and fused to the floor. Shackles hung from the posts. Scattered around it were the remnants of tools, surgical instruments, rotted leather straps, and a single glass vial still half filled with dark residue. And beneath the bed, wrapped in decayed linen, lay a small wooden box. Inside, Aldrich found a single lock of black hair tied with red thread, and a fragment of parchment covered in symbols that pulsed faintly in the lamplight. As he held it, a faint whisper seemed to echo through the room, not from his ears, but from somewhere inside his mind. "Do you see now?" He stumbled backward, the lamp flickering violently. The whisper grew louder, filling the air with a chorus of overlapping voices, men, women, children, crying, chanting, pleading. Aldrich dropped the box and fled, slamming the door behind him. When he emerged into the corridor, Sister Mary Catherine was waiting, her expression grim. "You found it," she said. It wasn't a question. He nodded, unable to speak. "The past doesn't rest here," she murmured. "It never has." That night, Aldrich returned to Latoya's bedside. She remained unconscious, her face serene. Yet as he approached, he felt the same hum in the air that he'd experienced in the chamber below, a vibration just beyond hearing. He took her hand gently. "What did they do to you?" he whispered. "And why are you still here?" Her eyes opened. For the first time in weeks, she spoke, her voice soft but resonant, carrying the weight of centuries. "Because you built your mercy on our bones." Then her eyes rolled back, and she went still once more. Dr. Aldrich never returned to his work after that night. Within months, he vanished from Millbrook entirely, leaving behind only his journals and a sealed envelope addressed to the hospital board. And it was a single page that read, "The dead remember, and they do not forgive." The minister had long known about the burial ground and had approved the removal of the remains, but he had no idea about Dr. Blackwood's experiments. The revelation that his sacred institution had been built upon suffering and had taken part in the systematic torture of vulnerable souls shattered everything he believed about his life's mission. "We must make this right," Reverend Whitmore declared, his voice heavy with guilt and resolve. "If this young woman has been carrying the weight of these injustices for nearly a decade, then it is our Christian duty to acknowledge what was done and to seek redemption." But as they prepared to confront Latoya with the truth, the hospital began to change. Strange events spread through its halls, suggesting the situation was far more complex than they could ever imagine. Patients across the building reported the same dreams, visions of long-past events that seemed woven into the institution's dark history. Members of the staff began to experience memories that were not their own, and the building itself seemed to react to this growing awareness of its buried sins. Doors opened and closed on their own. The temperature in Latoya's wing shifted wildly, indifferent to the season. Some staff claimed to hear voices, whispering in languages no one could recognize. Dr. Aldrich started to realize the truth. Latoya's presence had awakened something that had been dormant for nearly a decade. The accumulated spiritual weight of all those who had suffered and died upon the hospital's grounds. The crisis reached its breaking point when Reverend Blackwood, burdened by his own family's dark legacy, approached Dr. Aldrich with a confession that changed everything they thought they knew. "I need to tell you something about my father," he said, his voice trembling. "Something I've hidden for almost 30 years. He didn't die of a heart attack. He took his own life. But before he did, he told me about the young woman he'd been treating. He said she had shown him things about our family's past, things he couldn't live with. She made him remember the sins of our ancestors, and he couldn't bear the weight of that knowledge." The revelation that Dr. Nehemiah Blackwood had taken his own life after being confronted with the full horror of his family's history, slavery and genocide, added yet another layer to the mystery. It suggested that Latoya's ability to reach into ancestral memory was not confined to her own lineage, but could extend to anyone who came into contact with her. As the staff struggled to comprehend this truth, they realized they were facing something far greater than a single woman's mental condition. Latoya had become a living conduit, a bridge to the suppressed history of their entire community. She carried not just the pain of the oppressed, but the guilt of the oppressors. Her presence had awakened the spiritual dead of generations, and now everyone connected to the Blessed Mercy Infirmary would be forced to face the true cause of their ancestors' actions. As Dr. Aldrich prepared for what he knew would be his final confrontation with her, one question haunted him. Would acknowledging this truth bring healing or destruction? The young woman had already proven she could influence the minds and bodies of those around her. But what would happen when she was finally allowed to share the full truth? Everything she had seen, everything she carried. On the morning of February 20th, 1847, Dr. Aldrich made the decision that would define his career and change the lives of everyone within the hospital's walls. He summoned the senior staff, the 3 ministers, and a small group of stable patients to the main chapel. There, beneath the cold light of dawn, he announced his intention to let Latoya speak freely for the first time since her arrival. "For weeks, we have tried to understand this young woman through the lens of medicine and faith," he said, his voice echoing through the chapel. "But I believe we have been asking the wrong questions. Instead of trying to cure her or contain her, we must listen, truly listen, to what she has been trying to tell us about this place and the souls who have suffered here." Latoya entered the chapel dressed in a simple white gown provided by the hospital. Yet her presence was transformed, no longer quiet, compliant patient they once knew. She moved with a grace and authority that seemed to come from deep within. And when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of centuries. "I am not one person," she began, her tone steady and resonant. "I am the keeper of memories others chose to forget. I carry within me the voices of those who died unheard, the stories erased from your history books, the pain of those who suffered in silence. What you call my condition, I call my purpose." She stepped to the center of the chapel. As she did, the air seemed to shift, warmer and colder at once, as if 2 seasons were fighting for the same space. Several people gasped. They said they could feel it. The presence of unseen figures standing beside her, spirits that had waited decades to be acknowledged. "This building stands on sacred ground," Latoya continued, her voice rising in rhythm like a sermon and a song all at once. Before your ancestors built their hospital here, my people, and I claim kinship with all who have suffered, gathered to honor the dead and heal the living. The Pentecook buried their sacred ones here. Later, the bodies of enslaved souls were hidden in this earth when their masters denied them a proper burial. Dr. Aldrich felt his scientific skepticism collapse as he watched the room. Patients who had been sick and frail sat up straighter, breathing easier, as if a great weight was being lifted from them. Staff who had suffered nightmares and visions nodded in understanding. Her words mirrored their own experiences. When Dr. Nehemiah Blackwood brought me here in 1838, she said, locking eyes with Reverend Blackwood's face had gone ashen. He used instruments and techniques meant to sever the bonds that allow me to carry their memories, Latoya said calmly. But the more he tried to break me, the stronger those bonds became. Every moment of pain he inflicted only deepened my connection. Every scar added another voice to the chorus I carry within me. The revelation struck the audience like a thunderclap. Latoya had been a prisoner in this very hospital, subjected to cruel experiments meant to erase her identity and silence her heritage. Gasps rippled through the chapel. Several staff members began to weep as the truth set in. They had devoted their lives to an institution built on systematic cruelty. Your father, Latoya said, turning to Reverend Blackwood, came to understand what he had done, but only in his final days. The memories I carry are not just my people's suffering, but the pain of all who came before. When he looked into my eyes during our last session, he saw not only the anguish of his victims, but the torment of his own soul. He could not live with that knowledge. Reverend Blackwood rose to his feet, his legs trembling, tears streaming freely down his face. "What can we do?" he asked, his voice breaking. "How can we possibly make amends for what's been done?" Latoya's expression softened. For the first time since her arrival, she smiled. "Acknowledgement," she said gently, "is the first step toward healing. But true redemption requires action. The spirits gathered here are not seeking revenge. They seek recognition, remembrance, and a promise that their suffering will never be forgotten nor repeated." She stepped toward the altar where Reverend Whitmore usually led his weekly sermons. And then something extraordinary began to happen. The patients in the chapel started to speak, but not in their own voices. Mrs. Hitchcock, the pneumonia patient who had formed such a deep connection with Latoya, began to recite names, dozens upon dozens of names, of people buried beneath the hospital grounds, unmarked and forgotten. Young Timothy Wadsworth, the boy once thought to be possessed, stood and described in perfect detail the original Pentecook burial ground, even pointing out where sacred artifacts had been disturbed during construction. Other patients, their voices carrying strange cadences not their own, spoke of families torn apart by slavery, of children who had died in captivity, of rituals long forbidden and erased from memory. Dr. Aldrich stood frozen. He realized he was witnessing something that shattered every framework of science or faith he had ever known. These weren't delusions, they were testimonies. The patients had become conduits for voices long silenced, speaking to the living at last. "The healing you practice in this building," Latoya said, turning toward the doctors, "can never be complete while it stands upon a foundation of unacknowledged suffering. Every patient who enters here carries not only their own pain, but the inherited trauma of generations. Until this truth is faced, your medicine will only ever touch the surface of human anguish." Dr. Samuel Hartwell, the hospital's oldest physician, slowly rose from his pew. His voice trembled, filled with awe. "I have practiced medicine for 40 years, he said. "I've seen patients recover from illnesses that should have killed them, and others die from the simplest ailments. I never understood why some people seem to bear burdens far heavier than their own lives could explain. You're telling us that true healing means confronting not just physical pain, but generational wounds." "Yes," Latoya replied softly. "And it means accepting that the boundaries between life and death, between past and present, are not as fixed as your science believes. The ancestors live within us. Their unresolved pain becomes our pain. Their unfinished business becomes our burden. Only by honoring their stories can we hope to heal ourselves and our communities. From the back of the chapel, Sister Mary Catherine stepped forward, her rosary glinting in the dim light. "In my faith," she said quietly, "we believe in communion of saints, that the dead remain connected to the living through divine love. What you're describing, it feels like a deeper form of that same truth. The spirits who speak through you, they aren't separate from us. They are part of the same human story." Latoya nodded. "Your understanding brings us closer to the truth," she said. "But this connection carries responsibility. Those who bear ancestral memories, as I do, are bridges between worlds. We help the living remember what must never be forgotten, and we help the dead find peace through remembrance." The atmosphere in the chapel had changed completely. The air felt charged, pure, alive. Light streamed through the stained glass brighter than ever before. The constant hum of the hospital beyond those walls had faded into perfect silence. And then, a chilling narrator's voice might have said, "Just when we thought we'd seen it all, the horror in Millbrook deepens." If this story is giving you chills, share it with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit the like button to support our work. And don't forget to subscribe, so you never miss what comes next. Dr. Aldrich turned to Latoya. "What will happen to you now?" he asked, though deep down he already knew. "My work here is nearly complete," Latoya replied. "The stories have been told, the truth has been acknowledged, and the promise to change has been made. The spirits who have waited for generations can finally find peace, but the responsibility now passes to all of you." She reached into the folds of her white dress and drew out a small brass locket, the only possession she brought when she first arrived. She opened it, revealing not a portrait or keepsake, but a pinch of dark soil. "This," she said softly, "was taken from every sacred place where my people were buried and forgotten. It holds the essence of all the ground where suffering was transformed into wisdom." She placed the locket gently upon the altar. "As long as it remains here, in a place of honor, this hospital will never forget its true purpose, not just to heal individual bodies, but to mend the wounds that stretched across generations." Dr. Aldrich felt tears rolling down his cheeks as he began to grasp the full depth of what had happened. Latoya wasn't merely a patient with a strange mental condition. She was a living vessel of historical trauma, carrying the burden of collective memory. She had been waiting for the right moment and the right people to help her share that weight. "Will we see you again?" he asked quietly. Latoya's smile was both sorrowful and full of hope. "You'll see me," she said, "in every patient who carries pain they cannot explain, in every family haunted by inherited sorrow, in every community still trying to heal from the wounds of history. My work continues through those willing to listen to the voices that speak from the past." As her words faded, something remarkable began to happen. The patients who had served as conduits for ancestral voices slowly returned to their normal states. Yet they remembered everything. More importantly, they described feeling lighter, as if invisible burdens had been lifted from their shoulders. Mrs. Hitchcock later described the experience as the most profound spiritual encounter of my life. She said that after serving as a voice for the unnamed dead, she felt a deep connection not only to her late husband but to the whole of humanity. Her pneumonia, which had resisted every form of treatment, vanished completely within days of the chapel gathering. Young Timothy Wadsworth's parents reported that his episodes of madness never returned. Yet the boy remained unusually sensitive to historical places and possessed a gift for comforting those in grief or trauma. Dr. Aldrich would later write that the child seemed to have inherited a piece of Latoya's gift, the ability to stand between the living and the dead. But the greatest change occurred within Dr. Aldrich himself. What he had witnessed in that chapel transformed his entire understanding of medicine, of healing, and of the human soul. He began developing treatments that reached beyond the physical, therapies that touched the psychological and spiritual roots of illness, and his ideas would later help shape what the world would come to call holistic medicine. In the days following the gathering, The Blessed Mercy Infirmary began to change. It was as if the building itself could finally breathe. The air grew lighter, patients recovered faster, and the staff worked with a renewed sense of purpose. The heavy atmosphere that had haunted the hospital for weeks was replaced by an overwhelming calm, a sense of true healing. Dr. Aldrich spent long hours documenting everything, creating a detailed record that would serve both as a medical case study and as historical testimony. But it didn't take long for him to realize that the political and religious climate of 1847 Massachusetts was not ready for such revelations. Within a week, Reverend Whitmore was visited by prominent city officials, the mayor of Millbrook and members of the Massachusetts Medical Society. They had heard disturbing rumors of strange practices at the hospital and demanded explanations. "We cannot allow this institution to be associated with heathen rituals or spiritualist nonsense," declared Mayor Harrison Blackwell during an emergency meeting. "The reputation of our community depends on maintaining proper Christian standards in every civic institution." Dr. Aldrich found himself trapped in an impossible position. The evidence was undeniable. Patients had healed from incurable conditions, and the hospital's atmosphere had transformed. Yet explaining it would mean admitting to phenomena that defied both science and faith. The pressure only grew worse when families of former patients began asking questions about the hospital's early years. Dr. Nehemiah Blackwood's journals revealed a history of cruelty and abuse that could have led to criminal prosecution had he still been alive. The leadership now faced the threat of lawsuits and public scandal if the truth came to light. It was Latoya who offered solution. On the morning of February 28th, exactly 6 weeks after her arrival, she asked to meet with Dr. Aldrich privately. When he entered her room, she was quietly packing the few belongings she owned. "It's time for me to leave," she said softly. "My work here is done. My staying would only bring trouble to you and the hospital." Aldrich protested, insisting she still needed care and that she deserved compensation for all she had endured. But Latoya only smiled gently. "The healing that needed to happen has already taken place," she said. "The spirits have been acknowledged. The truth has been spoken. Those who were ready to hear it have heard it. Forcing others to accept what they cannot yet understand would only bring resistance and undo everything we've achieved." She handed him a sealed letter addressed to the hospital's board. In it, she released the institution from all responsibility for her care and requested that her record be sealed to protect the privacy of everyone involved. She also gave instructions on how to honor the sacred burial ground beneath the hospital, along with recommendations for treating illness that included both the mind and the spirit. "What will you do now?" Aldrich asked, though he already sensed her answer. "I will continue my work," Latoya said. "There are other places where the dead still seek a voice, other communities that must face their hidden pasts. The gift I carry does not belong to me alone. It belongs to all who are willing to stand as bridges between worlds." And on the morning of March 1st, 1847, Latoya simply vanished. The night nurse reported checking on her at midnight and finding her asleep, peaceful, calm, untroubled. But when the morning shift arrived, her bed was empty. Her few belongings were gone. There was no sign of how she had left the building. The only trace of her presence was the brass locket, resting on the chapel altar exactly where she had placed it. In the months that followed, Dr. Aldrich began to implement every change Latoya had suggested. He introduced new standards of care, placing deep importance on each patient's family history and cultural roots. He formed support groups for those suffering from what he called inherited trauma, and developed methods that blended medicine with spiritual and psychological healing. Most significantly, he worked alongside Reverend Whitmore to create a memorial garden on the hospital grounds, a sacred space dedicated to those buried without recognition. The garden held markers with the names spoken during the chapel gathering and a central monument acknowledging both the sanctity of the land and the hospital's pledge to honor all who had suffered there. The results were extraordinary. Patient recoveries improved dramatically. Staff turnover dropped, and the hospital gained a reputation for treating not just physical ailments, but the deeper causes of human pain. Yet, the true nature of these transformations was never publicly revealed. In his official reports, Dr. Aldrich described Latoya merely as a patient suffering from dissociative disorder who had responded positively to therapy. Her influence on others was attributed to the power of positive psychology and the benefits of shared healing. The chapel gathering was documented as a successful group therapy experiment demonstrating the value of collective emotional release. These polished, clinical explanations satisfied the skeptics and allowed the hospital to continue its work without political or religious interference. But privately, Dr. Aldrich kept detailed journals, personal records of everything that had truly occurred. He hoped that someday, a future generation might be ready to understand the deeper truths Latoya had unveiled about healing and human consciousness. The three ministers who had witnessed the event struggled to reconcile what they had seen. Reverend Blackwood spent months tracing his family's past. Eventually, he established a scholarship fund to educate children descended from families once scarred by slavery. Reverend Marsh began weaving lessons of inherited trauma into his sermons, teaching his congregation how the sins of their forebears could echo through generations. And Reverend Whitmore became a public advocate for what he called integrative healing, insisting that true medicine must embrace not only the body but the soul. The patients who had participated in the chapel gathering carried its memory for the rest of their lives. Many said the experience had changed them completely, altering how they saw themselves and their place in the world. They developed a deep sensitivity to others' pain, an uncanny ability to comfort those struggling with grief or loss. Some even became informal healers in their own communities, helping others confront painful family histories and long-buried wounds. Dr. Aldrich continued his medical practice for another 30 years, but he was never the same. He became a pioneer of what the world would later call holistic medicine, teaching that patients must be treated as whole beings, mind, body, and spirit. His methods influenced an entire generation of physicians who carried his philosophy forward. Yet there was something even more remarkable. Several of those doctors later reported meeting patients who shared Latoya's strange gift. Individuals who carried ancestral memories, who could sense the hidden sources of pain in others, and who seemed to act as bridges between the living and the dead. These encounters were rarely recorded in official documents, but they hinted at something extraordinary, that Latoya's gift was not unique, that others like her existed, scattered across generations and geography, quietly carrying the same burden. In 1877, 30 years after Latoya's disappearance, Dr. Aldrich received a letter from a colleague in Ohio. The man described treating a young woman who matched Latoya's description exactly, possessing identical abilities. Similar reports soon surfaced from Virginia, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina, always the same pattern. A woman of mixed ancestry, appearing to be in her 20s, speaking in forgotten tongues, guiding others to face the hidden truths of their pasts. Dr. Aldrich began to wonder if Latoya was part of something far greater, a network of souls bound by purpose, preserving the memories that history sought to bury. Were they many individuals sharing a sacred calling, or different reflections of the same eternal consciousness? It was a mystery he would never solve. In his final years, Aldrich devoted himself to compiling his notes and reflecting on all he had witnessed. In his last journal entry, written just before his death in 1889, he penned his ultimate conclusion, the words that defined his life's work. "I have come to believe that what we witnessed in 1847 was no anomaly, but a glimpse into the true nature of human connection. We are not separate beings, but threads in a vast web of shared experience that spans generations. Those like Latoya remind us of what we've chosen to forget. They heal the wounds that stretch across centuries and preserve the bond that tie us to both our ancestors and our descendants. Medicine may treat the body, but true healing begins when we confront the collective trauma that shapes us all." The brass locket remained on the chapel altar for decades, untouched, until 1923, when the old hospital was demolished to make way for a modern medical facility. According to demolition records, the locket was never found among the recovered artifacts. Some believed it was taken by someone who understood its meaning. Others whispered that it had simply returned to the earth from which it came, its purpose finally fulfilled. Today, the site where the Blessed Mercy Infirmary once stood is now just a small, quiet park. Few visitors know the truth, that beneath the trees and walking paths once stood a place haunted by suffering, redemption, and something far beyond human understanding. Most who pass through feel nothing unusual, but those who are sensitive, those who listen, they speak of an uncanny sense of peace in the air, as if the land itself remembers a healing that once took place there and continues to comfort those who still carry unseen wounds. The story of Latoya's case raises haunting questions about the true nature of consciousness, the persistence of ancestral memory, and whether some souls truly exist as bridges between the living and the dead. Were her gifts simply unexplored aspects of the human mind, or genuine contact with something spiritual, something timeless? That remains for each of us to decide. What cannot be denied is a profound transformation she left behind. Every patient who met her, every doctor who treated her, every minister who stood beside her, none of them were ever the same again. They spoke of seeing humanity differently, of understanding that healing is not just a mending of bodies, but the reconciliation of history, memory, and pain. The case of Latoya proved something the world still struggles to accept, that true recovery, whether for one soul or an entire people, demands that we confront the hidden sources of suffering, that we face the shadows of history and the echoes of trauma that continue to shape our present, and that healing begins the moment we create space for silenced voices to finally be heard and honored. The question of who Latoya truly was, how she came to possess such extraordinary abilities, and where she went after leaving the hospital, may never be answered. But her legacy lives on in the lives she touched and in the message she carried, that the past is never truly gone, and that the wounds of our ancestors live quietly within us until they are acknowledged. Her story stands as a chilling reminder that some of history's most important lessons come not from those who held power, but from those who carried the unbearable burden of remembering what others chose to forget. In our modern world, obsessed with progress and the promise of moving forward, Latoya's story whispers a different truth, that real progress requires the courage to look backward, to honor the pain that came before us, to give voice to the forgotten, and to understand that the dead still speak through the living in ways science has only begun to glimpse. So, what do you think about this unsettling case from 1847 Massachusetts? Do you believe that some people can truly carry the memories of their ancestors? Or was it all a strange convergence of psychology, guilt, and coincidence? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story gave you chills, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more dark mysteries that challenge everything we think we know about life, death, and the thin line between them. Until next time, remember, the most terrifying stories are not the ones we invent, but the ones that force us to question reality itself.